In less than a week, the Omicron variant has swept the globe with more uncertainty about COVID. In many countries, especially in Europe, new restrictions were being introduced anyway, with the winter surge in Delta variant infections. Germany is the latest to announce new measures. Signs like these, vaccinate, immunized, is the way this country and others are now heading. The unvaccinated are now barred from access to all but essential businesses, such as grocery stores and pharmacies. Angela Merkel says new stricter measures are essential in a situation she finds depressing.
To be quite honest, the fact that we are now in the middle of such a strong fourth wave does not make me happy. It depresses me, especially when I look at certain regions.
In France, where the health service is struggling with record numbers of COVID infections, the government's scientific advisor believes the Omicron variant will be dominant within a matter of weeks.
Le vrai ennemi, c'est la cinquième vague avec le variant.
The real enemy is the fifth wave with the Delta variant. There will be some time before the Omicron variant establishes itself in France and in Europe in general. We estimate it to be at the beginning of 2022 or at the end of January.
In the UK, where booster jabs will be available to anyone over 18, the arrival of the Omicron variant has led to a clamour for vaccinations.
We're starting to see people who I think are probably anxious about the new variant that's been come across, and we've started to get people coming for their first and second jabs that they could have possibly had months ago.
The UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson himself got his booster on Thursday. In Germany, the government will also consider compulsory vaccinations. And as people put their hopes in jabs being able to ward off Omicron, something that scientists are still unsure about, there's a chilling prediction from the European Union's Public Health Agency. It says that within a few months, the Omicron variant could be causing more than half of COVID infections in the EU. And from the Norwegian capital Oslo, another warning. More than 50 people have been infected with the Omicron variant at a Christmas party in a restaurant. The government says they were all vaccinated. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera.
Calling for their freedom in Melbourne. Large clusters of people on the streets of one of Australia's biggest cities. Waving the flags of many countries, demonstrators who now call Australia home demand a reopening of their communities, but oppose a mandatory vaccine.
I was a teacher for 30-odd years, and vaccination was always a voluntary thing for parents and kids. To make it a compulsory thing for kids is just absurd.
We have to just learn to live with this and get on with things. We can't just keep locking us down, just because there's a new variant. There'll always be a new variant.
If you're the kind of person that realises that freedom comes with certain social responsibilities, yeah?
Australia, which largely closed its borders when the coronavirus pandemic began, is now dealing with an outbreak of the Omicron variant. The new emergency is further testing government efforts to boost the economy following COVID lockdowns.
I expect us to see further community spread within Australia and other parts of the world, but that may not necessarily be a bad thing because it will give us a lot of opportunity to understand how this variant works in highly vaccinated countries.
In the state of Victoria, where full vaccination has become mandatory to access most things, it is the unvaccinated who make up the majority of people in hospital with COVID. But most Australians are in support of vaccine jabs, with nearly 90% of everyone over 16 being fully vaccinated.
At the moment, there's lots of anger after this COVID crisis, and I think it's being directed at the wrong side. We're seeing, healthcare workers being attacked, bookshop workers, and it's really important, I think, that we say, actually, the majority of us did support these health restrictions that saved millions of people's lives, and the majority of us actually do stand in social solidarity with each other.
For a country whose COVID rates pale in comparison to other developed nations, for these Australians, the time to return to normal is long overdue. Gillian Wolfe, Al Jazeera.
Experts in South Africa say the surge in COVID-19 infections is the highest they've seen since the start of the pandemic. And they blame the latest and possibly most contagious variant, Omicron.
They warned us that the variants would generally be more transmissible, but most of the time they would be less severe. Today, as we enter the fourth wave with a new variant, we can see confirmation of this warning.
While people from this and other countries in southern Africa are facing international travel bans, lockdown restrictions in South Africa are at their lowest. The government is instead urging people to get vaccinated. So far, 42% of adults have received a jab.
With hospital admissions mainly dominated by those who are not vaccinated, and young people below the age of 40, most of whom are not vaccinated. At this stage, we can say that even in Gauteng, which accounts for 72 to 80% of the new daily infections, we have not yet reached threatening stages in terms of our hospital capacity and the new hospital admissions.
The government says it has enough resources to deal with the outbreak, even in one of the worst hit provinces, Gauteng. The latest statistics show daily infections are growing, and health workers are also concerned about the high number of children under 5 years old who've been hospitalized.
The phenomenon of young children, younger age groups, as well as pregnant women having increased infection is currently being investigated. We are hoping that in the coming weeks, we'll be able to also give reasons for why this particular cohort of patient is having increased infection.
But officials hope that while the new variant appears highly transmissible, it can be managed.
The government says it will continue door-to-door campaigns and community awareness programs to try to convince people to get a jab. Health experts say the number of people dying from COVID-19 has remained low because of vaccinations. And right now, 1 in 4 people tested for COVID-19 in South Africa are recording positive. Famida Miller, Al Jazeera, Johannesburg.
President Biden had been due to outline a winter plan for dealing with COVID before the discovery of the Omicron variant. But the president appeared hopeful that even those reluctant to get vaccinated were changing their minds now.
There's some evidence in one poll, I won't mention it because I'm not positive of the number, I was told this as I was leaving the White House, that there is an expectation that 30% of the non-vaxxers said under no circumstances would I get a vaccination, because of the new variant, are now saying, I'm going to get a vaccination.
Biden is vowing an approach based on what he calls science and speed and not chaos and confusion, the underlying principle of his winter plan to make resources available to prevent another lockdown.
It doesn't include shutdowns or lockdowns, but widespread vaccinations and boosters and testing and a lot more.
In order to ensure the 100 million eligible Americans who have yet to get a booster shot do so, they will be contacted and availability ensured. Hundreds of family vaccination clinics will be opened where all eligible age groups can be vaccinated at the same time, and mobile vaccination clinics will be sent to underserved areas. To prevent school closures, the Centers for Disease Control will release their findings on whether it's possible to test all students on site instead of sending them home after a COVID case is reported. Home testing kits will be covered by health insurance or provided free for those without insurance. The number of surge response teams, medical staff who can be deployed into areas where medical resources are being strained by the virus, will be increased. Biden is pledging to speed up delivery of the vaccines it has promised to the developing world, and travelers to the US will be required to be tested within a day before departure instead of 3 days. The mask mandate on public transportation will be extended into March. Some scientists and the World Health Organization have argued that the case for boosters for the entire adult population, and not just those particularly at risk, simply hasn't been made, nor is there evidence as yet that boosters increase protection against Omicron. The WHO argues that to prevent further variants, the priority should be to get vaccines to the developing world.
I call on all member states to choose to achieve our targets of vaccinating 40% of the population of every country by the end of this year and 70% by middle next year.
Something Biden didn't announce was requirements for vaccination for domestic air travel, a measure that some argue will further nudge the US's unvaccinated eligible adults to get the shot. But at a time of nationwide legal wrangling over vaccination mandates in the workplace, that would clearly be a hard sell for some. Shia Britansi, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Waiting to be examined by a doctor. These patients are here to protect themselves from yet another deadly virus. Yellow fever has killed dozens in Ghana's West Gunja district, but health officials here say despite the rising number of cases, deaths are slowing down.
Wherever we identify cases in the community, we go in there to look for more cases. We do a case search and we vaccinate those who are not protected against the disease.
Yellow fever is transmitted through the bite of an infected mosquito. Symptoms are mild and can develop up to 9 days after exposure. But about 15% of those infected develop serious illness that can lead to potentially fatal bleeding and organ failure. Cases have been detected across a wide age range, from 4 months to 70 years, with women accounting for more than half of the cases in Ghana. There are concerns the government is downplaying the number of those infected and not all cases are being reported.
You look at the numbers and then you also look at what is on the ground. It appears all the cases are not reported, simply because of the lack of education. And so the health people need to do a lot in terms of sensitizing our people to get to know what the virus is all about, how they can detect early signs and how they can report.
There are also concerns about shortage of vaccines. Ghana is trying to secure 400,000 doses from the World Health Organization and hoping they are able to contain the outbreak before it becomes more widespread. Hamera Chaudhry, Al Jazeera.
Juan spends his days on his phone contacting other asylum seekers from his native Cuba.
I thought of making a list to see how many Cubans there are and give this to whichever organization we could. There are lawyers, doctors, civil engineers. We're not brigands. We wanted the country that will embrace us to see that we can offer things to society. We're not here to extract wealth and go home, but to be part of society and contribute.
Juan says he became aware of the plight of other Cubans when he was arrested while trying to catch a plane to Italy. The walls of his cell were covered in graffiti opposing the communist regime in Havana. Cubans have been arriving in Greece since food shortages led to unrest and a violent crackdown in Havana last July. The US border is closed to them, so they fly to Russia visa-free, then to Serbia and walk to Greece. Many pay about $9 a night for a bed in a flat, but with their money running out, they sometimes find themselves on the street. Juan's friend Carlos managed to find a week of work in construction.
I have 11 euros on me. That's all that's left from the week I worked. There are 9 children. Juan and I pooled our money and bought milk and other groceries for them. We are part of a group where everyone helps each other. Tonight I don't know where I will stay. I will make some calls. If I can't find a place, I'll make a plan. But there are others who are worse off.
Carlos spent all the money he brought from Cuba buying several tickets to fly from Greece to Germany or Spain. Police foiled all his attempts to get there. Cubans could apply for asylum. That would entitle them to a rent subsidy and monthly cash allowance. But they would have to have registered at a reception centre, like those found on the East Aegean Islands, the usual entry route for refugees. There was no such centre on the North Macedonian border, where they entered Greece. So their only option now is to apply online. Even that is difficult, says Vasilis Papadopoulos, who runs a legal aid charity for refugees.
There are not even Spanish interpreters, because this is a new refugee wave, let's say. Right now what is going on is that the authorities do not register them as asylum seekers and force them, let's say, to live either back to their own country, to Cuba, or to find their own way, let's say, elsewhere.
These refugees have another option. They can formally apply for asylum before being deported, but then they'd risk being imprisoned back home. We asked Carlos how he felt about that.
I'd rather spend my life in jail here than return to Cuba.
JEAN-FRANCOIS, Al Jazeera, Athens.
Assessing the damage from above after Mount Semeru spewed piles of ash 12,000 meters into the sky. Down below, entire homes have been submerged, villages blanketed with falling ash. The creeping lava is destroying everything in its path. Semeru is one of Indonesia's nearly 130 active volcanoes. and is the highest peak on the nation's most densely populated island of Java. The sudden eruption was triggered by days of heavy rain.
Everyone was scared and running in panic because this eruption was much bigger than the eruption that occurred last year.
Smoldering debris, thick smoke, and power outages have hampered search and rescue operations. Evacuation efforts have been suspended for now, with the clouds surrounding the affected area remaining too hot to handle. People who managed to escape have been staying at this evacuation center.
The people behind me are evacuated local villagers. At the moment, they need assistance like daily necessities, food and drinks. We also don't know how long they need to stay here for.
Those who want to return home have been told they can't, and to stay far away from the crater's mouth. The volcano had seen an increase in activity in recent days, but its alert status was not raised. Now, many here want to know why they weren't warned.
Why they are caught by surprise? What went wrong? Is somebody sleeping on the job, or our way of communicating the danger is not sufficient?
An answer many will be seeking as they pick up the pieces of what is left behind. Gillian Wolfe, Al Jazeera.
This is a new routine for Ali, who owns this gourmet market in Istanbul. He has to frequently update the prices on many goods as the Turkish lira continues its free fall. It's lost at least 40% of its value against the dollar since September. Ali says as suppliers increase the prices, he has to do the same. According to the Chamber of Agriculture, the difference between producers' selling prices and what people pay for goods in supermarkets rose ninefold in November. The government accuses supermarket chains of stockpiling and manipulating prices.
Take this juice, for example. It was 29 liras before the latest price increase. Now I have to sell it for 41.5. Our customers are reacting. Even some of them get that it's not us, but the economy in the country.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan argues high interest rates are behind all the country's economic problems. He says he asked the central bank to curb interest rates so that companies can borrow for less. And by boosting growth and exports, Turkey can become Europe's new China.
The government says it is testing a new model for Turkey's economy. But the experts warn it may fail as the country is suffering chronically high inflation and relies on foreign funding and energy resources.
Economists like Professor Ashkin say the policy is highly unusual and it's not working.
Halkın büyük kesimi de ücretli çalıştığı için.
Most citizens are wage workers. Creating jobs by production is good by any means, but it needs a plan and priorities. Inflationist pressure is rising, so Turkey should switch to a conventional economic policy.
Değerli arkadaşlar.
Erdogan has reshuffled 3 treasury and finance ministers and fired 2 central bank governors in a year, and that's unnerved investors.
Despite the foreign investors, fund managers see a great potential here. The uncertainties and other risk factors stop them from coming. We need to bring down both economic and geopolitical risk premiums by proving it's under control.
President Erdogan's AK Party has governed Turkey for 2 decades. And ahead of an election scheduled for 2023, he has promised all economic problems will be solved in the next 6 months. But right now, many people say their biggest challenge is the rising price of food, fuel, medicine, and other essential goods. And they are waiting to see whether their government can end Turkey's currency crisis. Sinem Köseoğlu, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
They stand in the cold waiting for instructions from a Ukrainian soldier. This is one of only 2 places where people can cross the more than 400-kilometer front line in eastern Ukraine.
We haven't been able to freely come and see our relatives and friends for more than 7 years. Both sides make obstacles for us. I'm using my Ukrainian passport and they now say it's not enough for me to cross. I have to go online. I've been trying for 3 days.
Many of the elderly and infirm came to the Ukrainian government-controlled side to collect their pensions, which are only around $100 a month. The first separatist checkpoint is around 3 kilometers down this road. Now, before the conflict started in 2014, the journey time from the town of Donetsk to here was around 30 minutes. But now, because of the complexities of travelling across the separatist-controlled region, many people decide to come via the Russian border, and that can take more than a day. Nikolai is accompanying his wife to separatist-controlled Donetsk. He can't find a nearby hospital on the government-controlled side that can carry out the life-saving operation he says she needs.
I'm 80 years old and lived through so much. I hope my children and grandchildren can live a better life. I just hope doctors can save my wife. As they say, hope dies last. It's so difficult. It's terrible that this happens to us at our age.
The checkpoint is only open twice a week. Red Cross trucks pass carrying tons of aid for around 3 million people the UN expects to need humanitarian assistance next year. And that's on both sides of the front line. Soldiers tell us they hear shelling a few kilometers from here every night. Ceasefire monitors with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe say both sides regularly break the ceasefire agreement signed in 2015. Mikhail has just arrived from separatist-controlled Donetsk.
All my friends who wanted to leave and most of my family have left. Some to Ukraine or Russia, some to Europe. Many still there miss what life was like before 2014.
They wait for a seat on the bus to take them across what's called no man's land. Fields they never imagined they'd be afraid of before this conflict started more than 7.5 years ago. Charles Strapp at Al Jazeera, Novotrotsky, eastern Ukraine.
Marching to the beat of her own tune, in typical Angela Merkel fashion, the outgoing chancellor said her farewell to the 70s punk song titled You Forgot the Color Film by East German singer Nina Hagen. It's a throwback to Merkel's teenage years growing up in communist-era Germany.
The song was a highlight of my youth. The song also came from East Germany, and coincidentally, it is still played in a region that used to be my constituency, so everything fits.
The farewell ceremony takes place at night in Berlin headquarters of the Ministry of Defense. Soldiers typically march in full uniform and perform music pieces selected by the outgoing honoree. Merkel will be succeeded at the Chancellery by Olaf Scholz, a member of the Social Democratic Party. She will serve as interim chancellor until Scholz announces a new government by mid-December.
For nearly 5 decades, women have been able to get abortions in the United States thanks to a decision made within these marbled halls. Now, a new panel of Supreme Court justices is revisiting that decision and could take it all back.
It's heartbreaking to think that Roe could get overturned. And Roe has always been the floor and never the ceiling. But I want to live in a country where every single person can have access to health care.
Because it would mean saving the lives of so many precious unborn children who are voiceless, are unable to defend themselves, and they're relying on us to defend them.
The abortion case before the court comes from Mississippi, where the conservative state legislature wants to ban nearly all abortions after 15 weeks, well before viability. Lower courts have ruled the ban unconstitutional. But now the Supreme Court, with its new 6-3 conservative majority, will have the final word.
President Trump appointed 3 justices that he promised would overrule Roe versus Wade. But there is no reason, there is no constitutional basis to overturn nearly 50 years of precedent.
During the hearing, liberal justices voiced concern the court's legitimacy was at stake.
Will this institution survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts?
But many conservative states are viewing this moment as the most opportune in a generation to attack abortion access.
We're about to make it law.
They've enacted more than 100 state-level restrictions this year alone, including a Texas ban on abortions after just 6 weeks of pregnancy. But that's nothing compared to what may happen if the Supreme Court overturns Roe.
If the court were to do that, it would mean that states across the country that have enacted so-called trigger bans that would ban abortion at the moment that Roe is overturned.
Polls show the majority of Americans support access to abortion. These protesters, organized by the Women's March, are encircling the Supreme Court to have their voices heard, while protesters on the anti-abortion side held their own dueling rally.
This is what an infant looks like at 15 weeks old. The child is fully formed. We know that they have a central nervous system. We know that the heart is beating. So we know that this is not a clump of cells like we were lied to for so many years.
The hearing lasted about 2.5 hours. Lawyers from Mississippi argue the decision in Roe v. Wade was egregiously wrong and should be overturned, while the pro-abortion side argued a woman's liberty over her own body is at stake. The justices' line of questioning offered few clues to how they will ultimately rule. Their decision is expected in June. Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Hello to you, Natalie. First of all, just remind us, what is the situation on the island of Lesbos?
Well, you know, Lesbos is really on the front line of the migration crisis, of Europe's migration crisis, and this has been going on for many, many years, which is why Pope Francis did visit the island 5 years ago in 2016. Very emotional images back then. The Pope was so emotional, he took back 3 Syrian families with him. 12 people flew back with him to the Vatican in his effort to help. This very much is pretty much the situation today. However, the squalid and overcrowded camp of Moria burned down last year to the ground, completely razed. So the authorities have kind of improved versions of Camp 1 is in a very isolated part of the island. It's brand new, it's far better, it's clean. Families have, you know, their own space, etc. But, you know, rights group accuse them that they're completely marginalized there. They absolutely have no contact with the rest of the island. Islanders themselves, you know, at the beginning of the crisis, the migrant crisis, they kind of welcomed asylum seekers, etc. But they very much now feel that the European Union has abandoned them and to kind of deal with this issue on their own. And especially now with the situation in Afghanistan, with the Taliban again in power, they very much fear that there's going to be a repeat and they're going to be left to their own devices.
Now, the Pope's called for better treatment of migrants, as we've been saying. How is that being received in Greece, which has borne the brunt of this crisis?
Well, mixed feelings, to be very honest. They feel very honored that the Pope has visited Greece yet again. Locals on the island of Lesbos and in Greece feel that, you know, the Pope is actually caring a bit more than the European Union authorities, are giving more attention to what they're going through. We saw, you know, very emotional images of the Pope hugging children. The Pope himself completely unafraid of the pandemic, not wearing a mask, hugging, shaking hands, speaking with these people who have been completely marginalized by the European Union. They've been kept at bay. Today we saw images of humanity, really. And I think the Greeks welcome this. They want to show that they have, as they can, despite the financial crisis that crippled them for so many years, tried to help the situation with the migrants and refugees. Of course, the European Union has helped a bit, but it's not enough. And I think that's the message that the Pope is wanting to share as well with the rest of the world, especially as we see that European Union countries, Catholic European Union countries. I mean, Poland is a predominantly Catholic country. Around 85% of its population is Catholic, and yet it's raising a very strong, tough stance on migration. So I think that's very much what the Pope is trying to send as a message, and the Greeks are very much welcoming that.